So the title of the seminar, just so we all know we're on the right place and not on the wrong plane, is Gaming with Robert E. Howard and Working It Into Your Adventures or something like that. Maybe we should introduce ourselves first, then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about, and then find out if you guys have any specific interests, and then we can kind of dive into the topics. So my name is Joseph Goodman of Goodman Games. I'm a publisher.
I'm Eric. I am a spare writer, video guy, henchman, and DCC fanatic.
I'm Howard Andrew Jones. I edit Tales from the Magician's Skull. I'm a fantasy author. I do swashbuckling stuff for St. Martin's. And I'm also the editor of the new line of Conan fiction from Perilous Worlds.
I'm Harley Stroh. I'm an author.
Michael Curtis. I'm also author for Goodman Games, most recently lead writer on DCC Langmar, adapting Fritz Leiber to role-playing.
And we're all fans of Robert E. Howard. Obviously, when you hear that name, you think of Conan, but he wrote a lot. And he wrote enough that I'm sure everybody in this room has read, a certain slice of what he's written. So part of this will be about finding where we have those common grounds and then going from there. But to start with, what we were going to focus on is when you read Robert E. Howard, like the action is so intense, and he really conveys a lot of battle and combat and life and death, and he does it, in 3 short sentences, but you feel like he captured the whole encounter. So we're going to talk about how do you take that and turn it into your games, whether in terms of the pace or the rules or the player experience or things like that. We have some topics we wanted to focus on, but let me ask for a minute there. Let's start with a survey. Who here has actually read a Robert E. Howard story, just to make sure? Okay. Yeah, good days ahead of you, buddy. Of you guys, who has read one that's not a Conan story? So Robert E. Howard, non-Conan. Okay. And who here role plays RPGs? D&D, DCC, whatever. Okay, good, everybody. So cool. So we have some places to go here. You obviously all role play, so that's a good place to start. Most of you have read some version of a Conan story, so we can work there. And Robert E. Howard wrote, a lot of stuff, including humor. Like his first published work was Breckenridge. What's his name? Breckenridge.
Breckenridge, because I don't think that was his first published work, but he did all sorts of interesting stuff before he came up with the continuing characters.
Yeah. So we'll probably avoid that kind of stuff and focus more on the Conan style works because it's definitely more applicable to the game. Now, do you guys have any specific topics you want us to focus on or questions you want us to ask? Or do you want us to dive into our random topic generator?
When do you get the license? Who has the license for the game right now?
Modifius is the publisher who has the license, and everybody, by all accounts, are doing a great job. Yeah.
So you guys, have you explored possibly?
I would love to have that license. Yeah, I think it goes to a new publisher once every 5 years or whatever it is. There's kind of a cycle, and every publisher has their own vision for it. So someday their time will pass.
I would say, are you waiting? You're waiting for it.
Yeah, we're like a trap.
Okay.
But we're a very obvious trap.
You were hoping for a stealth announcement.
Yeah. It was like, Michael Curtis is done, so guess what Michael Curtis gets to do
But
now?
Mephisto has the license for all Hobbit Howard readings, or no, just Conan?
Actually, I don't know the exact terms. Definitely Conan. I don't know what else.
Yeah.
I actually know that they do have a license for all
Okay.
Robert E. Howard properties.
Cool.
So,
So why don't we start with the topic from the list? I'm going to roll a die. We'll see what we get. Sounds good?
That's good, sure.
No good. The list is like... it's fudgy. The list is only like 12 or 13 long, and I only brought a 20-sider, so ignore results above a certain number.
Wow, man.
There we go.
yeah, my team.
Boy, there was some sort of weird odd-numbered dice that we could use.
Yeah, I wish I knew a company that made those.
That's one of our raffles.
I know. Which I left them all in the booth. Howard-style magic. This is a good one.
How to evoke Howardian magics. Well, maybe we should talk about what those magics look like, guys.
Yeah?
I mean, I just read Black Colossus. That's fresh in my mind. Should I cover some
that.
stuff from there, and then we can all... Yeah.
It's a sweet one.
So that's the one about the battle and the sorcerer. That's been a sorcerer
Who never does anything.
He deliberately locks himself in a tomb and extends his life for 2,000 years or whatever it is.
Whatever it is, yeah.
So that someday, he avoids a great invasion, and he hopes that someday a thief will break into his tomb and awaken him, which is what happens. So first you have longevity. Magic is longevity. Then once he's awakened, he has this demonic steed, which appears like a basically evil-looking camel most of the time, but then it grows wings and flies through the sky like a demon at other times. So you have kind of a demonic servant type thing, and near the end it actually bucks his control and sort of basically tosses him onto the ground and then flies off into the sky, so he loses control of it. So you have unpredictable, uncontrollable, dark magic, fueled by demons essentially. What are the other elements in that one? There's a sorcery. Remember, the sorcerer's army invades through the valley, and it just looks like fog. And so Conan's army is, not really that concerned. And then Conan starts to realize the fog is creeping steadily forward. Then he puts his ear to the ground and hears the thundering hooves and realizes that there's an army hidden by the fog. And the fog vanishes like that. It's not a slow dissipation. It's instantly gone, and suddenly in its place are the charging hordes, which they could not see because of the fog. So it's all pretty simple magic, but it's used by the sorcerer in a way that conceals an entire army. So one simple illusion has drastic effects. And I suppose the devil camel too. Not quite as significant.
Well, that kind of bleeds into what Howard was saying just before the seminar about how the monsters in Robert E. Howard's world don't have to be fantastic and huge, and it's not a Draco Lynch. It's an ape.
Yeah, it could be like in, Rogues in the House, right? It's an ape dressed up and it thinks it's human. So it's wandering around in the priest's vestments and it's kicking everyone's butt, right?
Which is horribly creepy already,
Yeah,
right? You
right.
just have an ape in a costume. And
Right.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Why is that ape wearing pants?
So what would you attribute kind of that element of horror to?
The strange and the exotic and the more powerful than human. An ape is not something that you go see in a zoo and, oh, look at that, let's feed the animals. They're like, no, that thing can kill us. And you emphasize its big slathering fangs and its immense power, right? Yeah. Or you take a common animal like a snake and you make it really big and it wants to hunt us, right? I mean, that's, instead of, you don't start a Howardian story, oh my God, the ghouls are loose and they're on the streets. No, you don't see that. What you see is something that feels more like it's out of our natural world, but just a little bit wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
And this kind of feeds back to what we originally started, because we were talking about magic. Magic, and there's that element of subtleness to that I mean, because it's not like in your face. It's not. I mean, I can't think a lot of the Conan stories where, I mean, there's magic, but we deal more with like the effects of the magic rather than like we very rarely see like the fireball come streaking out of the tower or anything. It's more like the wizard performs his little rites, and then we cut to again like a Conan just like the fog seems thick today, or like there's something slithering up the wall, or so.
But like both of those elements are easy for us both as readers and players to imagine. I know what a fog looks like.
Right.
And then you take one step to the left, oh, that fog was concealing an army. Or I know what an ape looks like, and then, oh, it has a cape and it's stalking me in the darkness.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's just a little bit off of center. But as a reader and as a player, it's visceral and I can imagine it. And it's not something that's difficult to describe. It's this extraplanar being with 14 arms.
Right.
Well, that doesn't scare me.
I mean,
because I can't even imagine.
Right. If you've never seen a monster manual before, is it easier to describe a beholder to somebody or like a gorilla that wants to rip your head off? I mean, so
But probably beholders aren't a good example because it's like it's a floating eyeball with another eyeball. Like that's a very visceral description that would almost fall into the realm even. But like a snake now. Everyone's, we're all terrified of snakes. Now imagine a snake that's 30 feet long and curled around the base of this statue. It's just that, so much of the magic is that he can give us stuff that we can't imagine so easily.
And in the Scarlet Citadel, one of the coolest subtle things he does in the Scarlet Citadel, that snake is hunting people and it's coming after him, and it gets one glimpse of the sorcerer he frees, and that snake freaks out and leaves, and you're like, okay, what's up with that sorcerer that Conan's hanging out with, right?
Is that the one where he animates the dead guard outside?
Oh yeah, he animates the dead guard to break the lock.
Yeah, a lot of the magic in Conan is necromantic, corrupted, debased from ancient sources that Conan really doesn't appreciate, but Conan's not above joining with him if it'll get him to his freedom.
Yeah. Hey, let's take a question over here.
No, sorry.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I just like, you're saying about like it's a kind of stuff more from the natural world that we're familiar with. Do you think those things have kind of lost their punch when everything has 11 tentacles?
Well, it depends on how you describe it. Like he was saying, okay, instead of the beast of 1,000 eyes, suppose you're walking in a dark hallway and there's something stalking you. Well, it happens to be a gorilla in a cape, but you emphasize the strength of this thing versus your puny human abilities, and into the darkness. You don't know where it's going to strike, and there's been a trail of bodies that are lying there twisted, you know.
You walk down the hallway and there's a heavy odor and there's something in the air, something musky, something that's something is not right here. Just slowly the little bits, because that this is the best special effects generator on the planet. So you start feeding them anything, and that's like, okay, I don't know what the hell that is. I don't know if I want to know what the hell that is. And then you see a flash of red. You're like, okay, what's cool? All right, it's just like, what is it? Yeah, so.
So
Sorry, yeah.
oh, you mentioned red, you mentioned cape, and you mentioned fangs. I feel like if you feed that to your players, they'll be like, oh, it's obviously Dracula.
Right.
They got face with a giant ape, right? And I think that's just more of the like.
You wish it were Dracula. But I think to your point, I think there's a lot to mine in going back to these older ideas, the Appendix In, and like the way that these pulp authors were dealing with monsters. We've kind of accreted so much since then. Our default is something that's built upon 50 years of fantasy now. You go back to those simple things, and that's actually really terrifying. So if it was DCC, you make this massive gorilla with just semi-intelligence, but he has this crit table where he could rip your arms apart, and all of a sudden, when my character's at the table and I'm having, one arm pulled this way and one arm pulled this way because the gorilla rolled a 19, it's like, it's horrifying. Like, I can imagine that. Ghoul, you're draining my strength, whatever, but this guy just ripped my arm off. It's that sort of, that's Howardian, I'm not sure if that's really a word, but.
Sure.
Yeah, these beasts often tend to be primal as well. Like the ape represents the savagery of nature, and Conan beating it, is important for him moving forward. And the snakes all have this ingrained meaning to most of us as being evil, and that's something that he does well, fighting these primal forces.
Or the giant spider in Tower of the Elephant.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Or and it's not even like.
Yeah, he fights like 2 tigers, a spider. Like the list of what he fights is not that scary, but it's set up in such a way that it is terrifying.
Right.
But if you're a dude walking around Texas and you run into a rattlesnake, you probably have a visceral experience of snakes.
Yeah.
Oh, it's only a snake. No,
It's
You do get an ape with 4 arms at that point.
Sorry, I know you're saying that, but yeah. Yeah.
It's the way he sets it up, and the way that there is mystery, and when you're right. There's something about the primal nature where, in D&D terms, you roll a D20 and it's a hit, and but in Howardian terms, it's just like strength and death, and only one survivor. It's never like I lost 2 hit points. It's like somebody's dead at the end.
This is gonna go one of 2 ways.
Yeah, the consequences, like in gaming terms, somehow you have to make the consequences severe. Like you made it out, but you lost an arm.
That's good.
Or
That's
your
good, actually.
knee is inverted, or or whatever.
Well, except that it doesn't happen to Conan, right?
Well, he gets knocked out a lot. There's something about
Right,
he seems immune to critical hits. They just turn into knockouts on a routine basis. But
You don't want to kill your cash cow. I mean,
There's the god in the bowl as well. I mean, that's a huge mystery leading up to a snake that winds up being in there, and people disappear before you even really get a sight of it.
Yeah.
So how do we turn that into gaming material? I mean, crit tables are one. Very specific. Gorilla has a 4. On a 19 or 20, you roll a D4 on the crit table, and you
Well,
rip it
that's
off.
the thing. Yeah. How do you use that? But how do you set it up so that it has that Howardian sense? We were talking about fumbles. Like Conan doesn't fumble.
No.
Right. He never fumbles.
Yeah. So how do you?
Well, you're kind, but you reskin it, right, so that it's not the hero getting unlucky. He drops his sword. Conan never drops his sword, but his foe maybe gets an elbow in his eye and it staggers backwards, or he has blood dripping. You cut across the brow, and blood's obscuring your vision. -1 dice for the next round, and so it'd be simple to take the current DCC fumble tables and make them less random incompetent things happened to me today, and more like, oh man, I had a rough day today. Gorilla X, got the drop on me. When I was, you were attacked from behind, and like you said, you got knocked unconscious.
Yeah.
And so you can focus the fumble tables not on the hero's incompetence. That's not what, but more on the foe getting lucky.
The other thing you do, you get fumble forward is what it is. It's basically you suffer some sort of disadvantage, but in the long run it proves to be advantage. For example, the gorilla knocks the sword out of Conan's hand and he just skitters across the floor. So Conan knows he needs to get his blade back next round. So so on his action he tumbles across the floor, and so he gets a +2 bonus to armor class because the gorilla goes to grab him and he's underneath the gorilla, and then he has the sword. So we use the fumbles to change like the tactical map. Or that you have to do something, but you'll gain a benefit from it.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
I like that.
Failing forward is always good.
I see the wheels working.
He does, believe it or not, tend to get tired and worn down over long periods. I mean, he would never tell his foe that, but there's internal monologue where he's like, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. And he does fumble when he goes to reach for those vines that he wants to use for a spear to poison the dragons in Red Nails, I think, at the beginning. And the lady with him, whose name I forget.
Valeria.
Yeah, Valeria, saves his life.
Yeah.
Might be his only fumble.
Red Nails is a lot of wander around in the darkness worried that somebody's going to knock you from behind, That is a lot of, that fear of the unknown and fear of the darkness and the blackness and the shadows is seems like a lot of the threats. Years ago, I published this is in the D&D 3rd edition era, but a module that was basically about a bear that was raiding a town. But the author set it up in such a way that you basically investigate all these grisly murders, and we're trying to find out what horrible creature was killing your grisly town. That's great. I didn't even plan that. And it turned out it's just a bear, and you can basically take a bear and make it a horrible enemy. They get to the end and they fight this, and it's in darkness, so they fight this savage beast in the darkness, and they light the torch and it's a bear. So, and in retrospect, I think it was written in a way that's very Robert E. Howard, and it is about somehow setting that tone, as opposed to just throwing in a 6-armed demon,
So all right, so I'm sitting at home. I'm going through my Robert E. Howard, library, reading through, but I don't know how to translate that into a campaign world.
Right.
How would if only we had someone who had translated a classic pulp author into a campaign.
So basically, the trick that I did when I was doing librarians, this should, in theory, apply to most of it. Because I actually used the same thing when I was working on the Shutter Mountains, which was inspired by Manly Way Wellman. So it was a lot about going down to the source material and kind of how to convey that feeling. And what it really broke down to me is when I was reading the stories, I had a composition notebook next to me, and I would write down sentences that really struck me as being descriptive sentences that really conjured up that image to it. And I paid a lot of attention to vocabulary. For example, library uses a lot of hyphenated words, so that's kind of his little thing. Or he really loved the adjective great. If there's a geological feature, it's like the Great Salt Marsh, or the Great Forest, or the Great Sea. If you're running a campaign, it's inspired by Howard's work of trying to write like a Conan-esque campaign, or Solomon Kane, or whatever, Bram McMorn, paying attention to that language. And especially if there's it's kind of even an archaic phrase or something, or archaic word, that it keeps coming up, or it even comes with I don't even quite know what that is, but that sounds really cool. Just to keep a note of that and slip those into your descriptions when you're kind of working things up. And then if the players are somewhat familiar with it, even if they're not aware of it, it feels right. It's just it could just subconsciously cover it. It's like they can almost hear it. Did you lift that completely? You might not have lifted that entire passage per se from Howard, but you get that feeling, and then even without them being aware of it, they're sort of okay, this feels right. This feels natural. That was one of the main tricks that has served me really well. I have a bunch of competition notebooks, and they're great too because there's if you go back, sometimes you get I don't know what I'm gonna do on the next adventure or something like that. But if you read a story, there's, any author will leave something, like a throwaway line, or Conan had just returned from, stealing the monkey idol of whatever or something like that. And,
Never referenced again.
Yeah, never referenced again or something. So you're like, okay, and he's a monkey idol. Something that like is actual, canonical Howard, but he never did anything with it. And there's one guy. There's always one guy in the group who's read more than you have anyway. So he's like, wait a minute, oh my God, it's the monkey idol episode.
Well, yeah, there's apparently he was thieving for many years, but we really only have maybe one, possibly two stories where he's acting as a thief. Mm-hmm. Well, obviously he was stealing some other stuff. Maybe your characters have heard about that time that the Tower of the Elephant collapsed. What was up with that?
Right. And if you are going, to run something that is like Howard-esque, it's one issue. But if you like say whether you're playing Modiphius, the actual Conan role playing, or it's a homebrew thing that's set in Iboria or something, you have to make the decision is Conan going to show up, or is Bram McMorn going to show up, or is he always off camera, or or is it could even be like a rivalry, like Conan may never show up, but if the players are in Conan's, we're like that Conan jerk guy, they go to steal the jewel and they bust in the temple, like Conan was there like the night before, singing off with him,
Curtis, you are wrong 100%. The players need to be not Conan, but they are the focus of the story. Like one of the cool things about Conan, and lots of people disagree with me about this, but like when he walks into the tavern in the City of Thieves, he's the only wolf surrounded by these mongrels. Like he is the one single warrior in the tavern. He's not like the bartender is a retired 4th level warrior, and the guy over there is he was a fighter. No, there's just Conan, and the rest of these minions, or not minions, but not even level people. There's one classed person on this planet that happens to be Conan, level 5 warrior, and everybody else, they just get.
The TSR Conan role-playing game. Everybody remember that one?
Yeah.
Was it one of those things like was Conan one of the characters you could play?
Yes.
All right. So it ran into the same Indiana Jones problem. It was just like okay, you can either play Indiana Jones or you can play Short Round. It's like you're gonna play Conan or
No time for love, Dr.
Play Conan. You're gonna play the fat guy who does the Tower of the Elephant. This might break out of the tavern.
But every time your player characters walk into a tavern, everyone else should look up and see, holy smokes, where'd these guys come from? They're covered in wolf pelts, and looks like he was using that sword half an hour ago, and they're here for a beer. I'm gonna keep my head down, try not to get anybody's attention. There's a.
Well, I think you're onto something there. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we're probably going to say the same thing. If you're going to create Howardian characters and Howardian feel, then do you make them competent right from the start? I mean, do you give them like 4th or 5th level characters to start with?
Well, but you did that a little bit with Legmark, because you're dealing with a similar character.
Yeah, but that's specifically DCC, because DCC is written, if you're playing, you start as a 0 level, there's the whole funnel, you start as a 0 level gong farmer or cheesemaker or something like that, you go in the dungeon and whoever comes out becomes your first level character. So that we had to address that we had to address that with DCC. But if you're playing another rule system, that might not be the case. I mean, if you're playing, if it's your 5e, your 5e Conan-inspired thing, a first level 5th edition character is going to be, more robust.
It might just be character age and description. Conan's born on a battlefield. So he was 0 level, but he probably hit first level at the age of 6. At 18 or something. I feel like this might have been one of the comics, but I feel like this was one of the comics. There was some older dude who beat Conan when Conan was 3, and then Conan when he was 6 or 7 beat up this kid who was 6 or 7 years older than him.
Well, that's definitely comics, but that makes sense.
Yeah, so it might just be he levels up a lot younger, so in your character generation, you're the Conan guy, or the powerful warrior that everybody shies away from in the bar, and you're 16. And then you have the fact that you're hulking and huge and ready for battle and have no whiskers, or something like that, It might just be the way you describe it.
Well, you could run Robert E. Howard's Hyborian Babies campaign. All right, you guys are 6, second level.
When they're 0 level, that's when they're 3 years old.
Yeah, exactly. The death rattle takes on
You know, in DCC,
Skull with teeth in it, you know.
in DCC, by the time you're third level, I mean, you really almost at that sort of alpha character stage. Other than going into dangerous places or having them come to you, you're ruling the roost. It doesn't take long to get Conan-esque in DCC.
Yeah. But at the same time, and I know I'm harping on this, like, just as there's just one giant snake or one, man-ape, there should just be, one character who's Conan. And I mean, obviously there's a group of PCs, but they're all relatively unique in this world, and everyone else is playing bit parts around them. So should you, to really evoke the feel, should you just keep it pretty small, like only 2 or 3 players?
Yeah.
Yeah, keep it, I mean, that would definitely hew to it closest.
I think the sorcerer from the one that...
Scarlet Citadel?
Yeah, and then Valeria might disagree with Conan's primacy.
Right, but I mean, just like, in all the world,
It's not like a certain D&D campaigns where there's a magic store and 27 guys walking around.
Right,
6th level.
right,
It's-
yeah.
There's a rarity of power.
You are it, and so with that comes a lot of responsibility, right? Because everybody's looking at you when you come into town. And,
With great power, Uncle Ben.
they're either looking to start a fight or they're sniveling, they're growling and trying to stay out of your way.
I think freedom of moving from one area to another, from sailing to thieving to reaving to fighting large battles, has to be an important part of a Conan
Well, we were talking
campaign.
about that, sort of maybe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to flip around. Conan's primary goal is freedom. He doesn't like to be tied down. He does move from one adventure to the other quite rapidly, and that's kind of a feel that should be in a Conan environment.
We were talking about how to evoke sort of the feel. If you read the Conan stories in order, not in the artificially imposed chronological order like they're sometimes collected, but the order that Howard wrote them, he skips all over the place. The first one, he's a king, then he looks back when he's a thief, then later, well, you get the idea. Then some he's a pirate, some he's a Cossack, and so we were talking, well, maybe you just always keep your characters at a really competent level, and you say, hey, remember that time when your characters were thieves, and then you run a few thief adventures, like, how about that time when you guys were pirates? Remember that? And then you run a couple pirates, just sort of skip around.
I mean, that's the one way to fight campaign burnout, It's just like, as soon as you're like, another urban, wait a minute, all right. And suddenly, all right, suddenly the desert winds are whipping around you as you come across that last sand dune. And
There are driving things that keep his adventures going as well. He is betrayed often, especially when he's in a position of king. He's penniless often, which moves him to go become a mercenary. And he's often been being chased by people that would curtail his freedom, like bureaucrats or soldiers or whatever, and then he'll just jump on a ship and sail away.
I feel like there's a lot of merchants too. He's always seemed to be upset with fat merchants.
Okay, we're too far afield, so just indulge me for 3 minutes. But imagine, okay, so one of the challenges of we always say, you can run DCC in an episodic nature, right? Okay, so your main character sheet is me, so and so the king, right? And then you have like 4 sub-character sheets where you're like episodically, all right, well, today, guys, we're going to play that time when you lived at the Tower of the Elephant. And so you play through that character, and it's like, well, this is how I got the scar, and I got smacked on the back of the head at the end of the elephant. And so you're building your master character sheet of this grizzled, 45-year-old beaten down, king at the end of his life, and he's wondering where he got that scar, and this is why he got bonked on the head, and this one, he can't remember anything then. And so by the end of like 5 games that have like no relationship to each other chronologically, other than they happened before the current day. You've built this higher level, older, character at the, this lion in winter at the end of his life. Right. Anyhow,
Dude, I love that idea. Like,
Yeah, sweet campaign.
There's something about multi-classing.
Yeah.
You have to have some sort of system that encourages no penalties to multi-classing. And it's either way you're a warrior, but it's whatever the occupation of the warrior, the thieving warrior, the sailing warrior, the adventuring warrior. Like, that's a really cool idea. And the sub-character sheet idea is
I'm one arm because I lost myself.
I think Conan...
You just created the mid-level funnel is what you did.
Yeah, that's what
Once your characters go in,
It's a reprint of Sailors is what we have for. But Howard, Could you give us not the Appendix N version, but what's the must-read, because it's not just Conan, right? What are the must-read Howardian titles from Robert E. Howard that, if I was trying to do like a, really, do a broad sense of, to gather all the awesomeness that Robert E. Howard offers?
Top five in your opinion. Like
Top
two.
5 non-Conan.
If you think you can do 5.
Okay, Kings of the Night, that's the one where Bran McMorn summons Cole.
Oh, that's a great one.
Yeah, so it's like a team up between Cole and Bran McMorn. That one's awesome. The Dark Man, that has one of my very favorite minor Howardian characters, who only shows up in like 2 or 3 stories, and there's this haunted statue of Bran McMorn, and he's hauling around with him. That's really cool. Kings of the Night, the Dark Man. So there's 2.
Okay.
I could easily populate the next 3 with his very best historicals, because his best historicals, okay, they don't have any supernatural elements, but they stand shoulder to shoulder with the very best fiction featuring Conan that he ever wrote. So you'd be looking at Shadow of the Vulture, Road of Eagles, but there's 2, right? So there's 4 or 5 that are awesome, but let me get one that's not historical. So what's the name of the Solomon Kane story where he's fighting the winged vampires down in Africa? That one kicks butt.
Moon of the Skulls?
Yeah, the City of Skulls with the Moon and the Skull. I can't believe I've
Yeah.
blanked on that. And then
It's not like he has, this is a short amount of work or anything to
right,
do from it.
and then the El Borak stories. Now that's about a Western adventurer, like in the 20s, wandering around Afghanistan, and some of those are awesome.
And a best El Borak?
There's a complete El Borak from Del Rey. It's easy to find now. Most of this stuff is really easy to get in the Del Rey collections. You can get all the historicals in the Del Rey. I got to write the afterword to that. So if you just read the afterward, you can see which ones I definitely. But the El Borak, some of those are awesome because El Borak himself is in the middle of some kind of problem, and there's someone trying to kill him who's also after the treasure. But then this other tribe who hates them both comes in, and they got to join forces, knowing that one of them's going to backstab the other at any point. And then maybe there's like a third faction along too that might be up to something as well. Like there's some kind of hidden madman lying around trying to get them. I could go on and on. There's so many great Howard stories. It's just, yeah.
So how do we make them gaming?
Well-
You hit on some good stuff like the episodic nature, the fumble tables, the severity of the wounds or the impact.
Well, we were talking about factions and villains, right? I think that's one thing that Howard does repeatedly is it's not just the hero and the monster. There's other stuff going on. He frequently comes up with an ally that he can't trust, but they have to work together. The villains...
It's like a party, entry party.
Well, look, maybe we should talk about some of the villains, though. What do you think a Howardian villain is?
It's kind of your valley
Gorilla
right
King.
there.
Most of the villains represent the thing that Conan hates the most, the results of decrepit, decaying, corrupt civilization at its worst.
Fat merchants.
And greedy nobles, and usually behind useless kings and all of those other bureaucrat types, there's some sinister ancient power that is either manipulating them or, that's that thing in the shadows behind all of the general civilization stuff that he greatly dislikes.
But you're totally right. All the enemies are subtle manifestations of civilization.
Yeah.
There is the bad guy, but it's
But this is we're talking about Conan. But I mean, if you go, it's I don't think we could just say it's always going to be savagery versus civilization, because we're talking like Solomon Kane. We're dealing with like order and European morals versus it actually flips on itself. So I think maybe one of the things to keep in mind for like a Howardian here is actually the antithesis of, the player characters. They're a dark mirror reflection rather than like, okay, the players aren't going to be the outsiders anyway. They're the murder hobos or anything. But, you can do that on a deeper level rather than it's just always, it's always the Stygian, necromancer snake guy, so.
Right.
Conan, despite popular belief, is really a balance between the extreme of nature where men's boots have not trod upon and the end days of civilization that has become so complacent and so cowardly that they crumble against the forces that are destroying them. And Conan sits in the middle. He's not for absolute nature. He likes irrigation ditches. He likes farming. He likes order.
He likes the maps that he's made. He's mastered many languages by the time he's a king.
Yeah. He is not really against
But
civilization.
there's that one story where, I forget the name of it, where he basically sneaks out at night and beats up on, was it the Gamblers? Was that another comic book? That might have been one of the recent Marvel comics. I swear I read the novels too. But he's the king, but he tires of this, comfortable life, and so he sneaks out at night and goes and he sacks a couple bad guys, basically, who are bad guys. Like the city guard can't catch them, or for some reason can't prosecute them, so he wipes out the slavers in his city and comes back. So it's like this.
Conan.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, there's this element of, you're right, it's another variant on the danger of civilization. But you're right, that is Conan specific, not necessarily Howardian.
Right.
Mike, are there other parts of the Howard?
Well, I'm thinking you have to bad what it is, but I'm thinking the brand might be more Worms of the Earth.
Yes.
Is that,
Oh my God! When we were mentioning
Yes. Right.
how did I forget that one?
Right. That's like savagery, more than like debased savagery, or.
But again, like Eric, he's walking that middle line, right? Because he's fighting against Rome and using this horrible savagery against Rome. And,
Right.
He's
Right.
treading the line.
So
right
it's
down
like
the middle.
wildness, savagery, but even more savagery over here. So
you don't go down there.
So that's interesting because it's like the antithesis on both sides.
So you're
That's
talking
where
about
he
factions.
sits. Yeah. Another enemy or villain of Conan is the environment. A lot of times he finds himself, he doesn't willingly go into dungeons. He's betrayed or captured and finds himself stuck in a dungeon, which represents his inability to move. And Conan can't abide by that. So escaping the dungeon and the traps and all of these things that you have in a role-playing game is a little bit inverted because usually he starts in those places. And just the lack of freedom itself, there's nothing worse to Conan than that enemy.
And how about the environment, like the desert at the beginning of?
Oh, nice.
The Slithering Shadow is the title by which I first read it, and I know it's actually called something else, but I can't ever replace.
I have a passage from that right here. Zolful of the Dark was its original title.
Okay, yeah, okay.
And, as far as role-playing and tying this into a great new thing you have coming up, okay, the Lost City. The Lost City is so indebted to two tales from Conan.
Actually, well, let's not go into that
Yeah,
yet.
okay.
That's more
Yeah.
specific and broader than that, but yeah.
Well, Zuthal of the Dusk begins with him having marched across the desert after some terrible thing has happened, and he's the only one left except for the beautiful chick who's with him, who's barely alive, and he thinks that she's just about done for, and he probably doesn't have much left in himself, and then they see the city, and that's where it starts, right? And so it's against the environment. He's got to go into this decrepit, decadent city where there's this thing stalking. It would make a great adventure.
Yeah.
You got me thinking about wounds, and hit points, and the way D&D and many other role-playing games works, injury is, you can go from 100 hit points to 1 and you're still fully functional, and you drop dead. Whereas, you're right, in Howard there is this like fatigue or injury kind of phenomenon, so it just makes me think, is there some, you still have to keep the game system you're playing, but is there some system where every 10 hit points lost for every percentage, or there's just a constant accretion of wounds. So by the end you're limping and hurt and something like that. Or if in Conan terms, maybe if you have 100 hit points, there's no effect until 10 hit points, and then from there on it's rapidly declining. Or some way to handle the villains, the monsters, so to speak, which is they don't inflict any hit point damage at all, but they paralyze you and immediately kill you, or
lower your die.
Or your die, or rip
down
your
the
arm
die
off,
chain.
or, something like that. Some way to translate it.
I had a quick question. You had mentioned the dungeon aspect. And I was curious if you would have any advice then for how to be like, well, you're starting at the end of the dungeon with a sack full of gems and, awesome, cool stuff that you sacked, but now you have to get out.
Right.
And how to sell that to your players without well, obviously I would have disabled everything on the way down.
Well, that plays into what we've talked about already, where you do these vignettes, jumping around from different locales, different adventure locations. You can start them in that situation under this kind of framework.
Yeah.
Where that time you were stuck in the dungeon and you had to, get out. With the way that we were talking about, your what was that thing where you had 4 different versions of Conan?
Oh, right.
Well, you do something like, you start with the vignette, yeah, I got my bag of gold, but the person who was supposed to lead us out of the dungeon, turns out they were poisoned or they've been attacked, and now you don't have the back way out of the dungeon, so they got to do it themselves. Maybe the guy who's going to protect them on their way out is lying there poisoned, and then a snake-like form whips up, and its fangs are dripping venom, and it's like, oh no, we got to deal with the snake, and we got to get our own way out. Bam.
That's like classic Howard. Like you literally have the gems in your hand, and a colossal granite block falls behind you, blocking the exit. Then your guide is impaled by a poison stick. It's like the door open. Adventure, go! You're right. That's totally Robert Howard.
I would start. Okay, you're outside of the dungeon. Like, okay, right. The 6 of you, you have 10,000 gold pieces. In the plunder that you've gotten. All right, you have to get it back to civilization or something. Remember that desert you crossed here, the one with all the hostile bandits and the storm glow? Oh, and by the way, something ate your mules. Go!
And I think we can give our players credit, and I know that's not what you weren't doing. No, I'm serious, but like
I want to meet your players.
We all ingest media these days that begins in media res, right? Where we become more and more accustomed to seeing the stories jump around. And so I think once you bring it to players, I think they'd understand.
Just that makes sense because Howard wasn't writing dungeon crawls. He was writing stories with a narrative, And there's the antithesis of, there's, new school, narrative forms of role playing versus old school, mechanical things, and never the twain shall meet. But I personally don't believe in that, I think.
Well, when you're going to play once a month, maybe. Right. Episodic is the way to go. Like nobody can remember what we did last night.
And if everybody's going to buy into it anyway.
Right. It's like okay. Yeah, and then so so you start in the middle, so we can finish this in 4 hours, and then we'll see everybody again, next month at the brewery or the library or wherever you run your games, and so it'd be a nice way to be able to tie into the story really quickly. Yes, sir.
Just the example that you gave of the snake, of that kind of the snake comes up and now you have to deal with it. Like mechanically, how do you actually generate that life and death? One instant decides it struggle without just a save or die. Nobody likes that.
No, that's fair.
I have an idea on that. We've talked about him getting exhausted, okay? And often Conan will dally and fight and do all that, but there reaches a certain point where he hits this critical point where if he doesn't slay this beast now, he's not going to be able to. So it might be possible as he wears down with whatever mechanic that is, he gets a large boost of power. So you have him fatiguing, he's in a critical situation, and perhaps at that point or whatever threshold you make mechanically, he gets to super chop the snake, for lack of a better term.
But also, it's also a great use for henchmen. It's like we need to see the power of these things before they get to the big guy. So it sneaks up on the back of the party, and the guys that's carrying all the torches, he vanished. Whoops. We find Toby half an hour later, and and he's missing his insides. And so if we can, because as a judge or a GM, you want to play your cards slowly, right? Because you want to hopefully build this tear into PC. So even though the snake has the power to devour Conan in one bite, we spend half an hour. You hear the slithering. We just lost Toby, and then you hear the slithering, and not only that, but now you see the scrapes along the walls where this thing is so big and its scales are so ancient, and then at some point the players realize, wow, we've gone the wrong way. We're actually going deeper. Now it smells like reptiles. There's a snake. Okay, and so
Just snakes can also and do in the stories eat bad guys. there was the enormous jailer that treated Conan quite poorly, and Conan sees like these eyes behind him, and then no more for
That's true.
Conan's enemy.
We were talking primal forces earlier. The monsters are not necessarily in league with the villains. You know, they're another faction, right? We've been talking about how Howard often worked with different elements that were all competing.
I want to jump onto something you said, because this is something we were talking about before. We were talking about Howard and mass battles. Like how do we detect mass battles without busting out our Warhammer fantasy battles and playing them out over the course of 6 hours or something, which is just not going to be that Howard thing. So we're talking about showing the effects of something before it happens to the players. So like what you just so if the players are like, okay, they're the under generals or something like that. So have the players come up with a battle plan. Like, okay, so we're going to send one flank out this way, and then we're going to have these guys in the reserve. We'll have cavalry run around so let them do all like the the planning out thing. And of course like always happens with Conan, there's other generals or sub generals, and there's that guy who's like a real pain in the ass and hates them, and then there's the one guy who's kind of noble and respects him, but they're still kind of they're still vying for the king, the warlord's daughter or something. And then so you introduce like these minor little characters, and then when it starts coming to it, it's like like you do kind of dramatic point of view shift or something like where Krutuk the Hierarchian is like he's leading the cavalry, and they like come running around, and suddenly suddenly the bandits are ambush them or something, and just the player you describe how like the right cavalry flank collapses because they've walked into an ambush, or you even have the players roll a couple of dice to see how long that guy who was kind of cool, but he was a rival, how long he holds out, and maybe that influences something else, like it delays the bad guys. And they can always cut out as the left flank is like fighting to hold together, and it's like, okay, now what you guys are doing, so you can
There's that good bit in the Black Colossus where the princess doesn't understand why he doesn't just charge forward to meet the enemy. They don't get it. So there's an element of conflict there, even though she's an ally. They're not at each other's throats, but it's a role-playing moment, right? And then, of course, there's the snotty leader of the cavalry. He says, well, I'm just going to charge forward into battle, and he gets creamed, right? And there goes an important ally there.
I mean, that could even be, you could just watch, the players, they set up the entire battle plan,
right.
and they know, okay, all right, so you're going to hold out to like the last minute, then you're going to come in, and then you describe how he's had enough of these outlanders, and he decides glory, and watch all the players' faces just fall as they watch their battle, because as everybody says, no plan survives contact with the enemy. There you go.
Right.
Another quick way to do that is you can actually give the characters certain players or characters that are like those generals and people that you talked about, and they could get massacred by the enemy, like a short vignette where they go against unbeatable odds, and then when they get back to playing Valeria or Conan or the Sorcerer, the hatred for that enemy is already built in to the characters that were just destroyed by the enemy that Conan needs to face now.
I like how whenever he leads forces, he always gives the same speech, which is, "Follow me to hell, dogs!" I'm thinking about starting out, that'll be our motivational speech tomorrow. Sunday. Somebody have a question?
Yes. Speaking about RPGs, systems, and old games, AD&D had the one Conan version, GURPS, Mongoose, two editions, and now one in Mophidius. Which one you tried and prefer from them? I personally prefer the Mongoose version. The second one.
I don't play branded versions of it because I mean this is I like I said I vaguely remember the TSR one back then, and I remember the two modules that were put out for AD&D, but like really now I would probably want to do something that is more rules light, which is something that does convey itself to more narrative things, or something where maybe you only have 5 hit points, and every time you get hit, you don't take damage, but you get fatigue, or I draw I draw a rune, and okay, so you're now you've been blood out half of your eye, and you can't see, so you're -1 to hit, or something like that. I would like to keep. I wouldn't want it to grind down with like a lot of chart, or even make a cat, like I wouldn't do GURPS, but that's just me personally.
Well,
Conan
GURPS is
doesn't
great
like
if that's your thing, but it's like,
I liked the mongoose version. I remember they had a lot of really cool rules for imitating the various cultures and even
The information was
Yeah,
great.
exactly.
The information was, the guys that they got to do those really knew what they were talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
I know some of them are also, Modifius is doing a nice job with that as well, but I haven't read as much of it. But
Yeah.
the mongoose stuff,
Yeah.
I can definitely vouch for, having read a
maps, the
bunch of it.
cities. They did some great work.
It really evoked
That
the
was-
atmosphere.
that was the D20 version, right?
It was probably like, it was like
Yeah.
just off of 3.5.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yes, that's right.
Did they have feats? Was it?
Yeah, yeah.
Was one of them like muscle neck, where the guy who trained for a child to strangle things, like he could not strangle you?
You can correct me. There's something really sweet about like two-weapon fighting. Like they did a really good job with a lot of the combat stuff. And like you said, the research.
Yeah, the research. I never got to run that, so I can't speak to the rules. But I also know the Modifius, I've leafed through one of those, and the material in that one was also awesome. So it's probably at least near the level, possibly higher,
Nice.
of the mongoose
I
one.
gotta check that out. That's cool.
So guys, we have 7 minutes left, and the topic was Howard style magic. Good job covering that.
That's what I'm here for.
Any final questions before we start to wrap it up? Or should we roll again to get a new topic?
Roll, man. Let's see what you
Roll
get.
again. Roll again. 5, 2. Evoking Robert E. Howard style horror. That's a good one.
Hell,
Covered
Horror,
that already.
horror, yes.
Oh, horror.
Horror. I kind of covered some of
I
that.
think we did kind of cover that a little bit.
Yeah.
It's hinting and intimation rather than, you see a ghoul going down the sidewalk, and, it's more,
It's closer to Nosferatu or other older style movies where you didn't see the monster right away. There's
Yeah.
all this build up to it, and him being of that age, I think evokes that well.
Yeah, it feels more like the regular world, but with all sorts of exotic and interesting elements, right? So magic is not this commonplace thing. Yeah, there are people who are actual sorcerers who are advising the king. You believe in that shit, but you don't see it. It's like, oh yeah, I saw that the sorcerer was casting lightning bolts from the tower last night. No.
Yeah.
I mean, Howard's, like we kind of mentioned that Howard's the only author I think who ever made pigeon scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you can pull that off,
All right, give us another.
All right, we got a couple minutes left.
Speed round.
6.
You just rolled 6.
I think I rolled 5. Yeah, Howard style competence in characters.
Fumble rules. We did that already. All right,
Kinda
give us
good.
another.
I would cover almost everything. 5. Reroll. 5.
Actually, I do.
You got there. We signed
I
this at
do,
the
I
booth.
do have one thing about talking about like Howard level confidence kind of
Okay.
character is that what you might want to be, well, just as just kind of cut off that if you're doing like a level system, like all right, so every character like you have one Sumerian point that you could do, that you can invoke during the course of a game, and that's to pull off like that one cool thing that Conan could do, like stretch your neck so tight that the professional strangler can't.
Oh, that's cool.
Like
Okay.
just like that's your Benny or that's your Boone or that's
It's
your.
gotta be big though. It's not just like a +1.
No, it's not even that. It's just it's like
almost
a
like a
narrative,
trump
narrative
card.
thing. Like
Yeah.
it's like okay, or
It's a story game. What is that?
that guy who's giving me the stink
I'm
eye in
gonna
the
make that
tavern.
Titanic leap,
Yeah, I mean that's that's something more like a narrative role playing game. But we're talking about adapting a narrative, literary thing to to an RPG mechanic. Something where it's the character, so you don't need the mighty like neck of iron feet.
Right.
Like, the one time you need it, you're like okay. So.
Yeah, like give them the ability to, it's almost like a mighty deed where you, in the circumstance, create something like that.
Next one.
So we're officially supposed to end 5 minutes early to let people come in and go out. I see people coming in, I think, either early for the next one or really late for this one. So we should probably wrap up. You guys have any final closing comments or recommendations for stories? Or
In your question, there was a Conan game that I do remember playing, and that was like on the Apple IIe in the 1980s. There was that 14-bit, where you threw the sword and you were the side scroller. Do you anybody else remember that one?
That was coded in 1930. I remember that one.
If you want the
Looking on a
Howard
green
feel,
monitor.
if you want the Howard feel, buy The Lost City, which is coming out
sometime out soon
in the
for
future.
Goodman Games. So.
Yep. It has Conan galore in it.
Would you? Would you be willing to write us up a must-read list that we could find online somewhere? And then
Yeah, yeah. I'll put-
that'd be sweet to have a good reading list because a lot of us don't know about the Delaware Act.
All right, yeah. We'll put it together and get it on the Goodman game site in
Yeah, that
a
sounds
couple
good. That'd be
weeks.
awesome.
Yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be really cool.
Okay.
Cool. All right, that's it, guys. Hope this gave you some good ideas.
Thank you.